Tonight we drift into the silence between stars. Dim the lights, pull the blanket up to your chin and let your eyes close. For the next few hours there is no earth beneath you, only distance, only quiet, only the slow drift of a ship through empty space. This is Project Hail Mary, slowed down for sleep. A dim medical bay holds its equipment in low light, life support lines running from a central bunk to banks of monitors along the wall. A man lies on the bunk, tubes connecting his arms to the life support panel, his body covered beneath a thin sheet. The only sound is a steady electronic voice marking each reading, and the low hum of the systems keeping him alive. His eyes move beneath their lids, then open into the dark. The voice registers the shift and speaks again, even in tone, asking a simple arithmetic question. He does not answer. His breath changes, shallow at first, then faster, and his hand rises toward the tubes at his arm. From the ceiling above the bunk, a pair of slender robotic arms lower into position and reach for his wrists. He pulls against them. The tubes come free in a single motion, and he rolls from the bunk to the floor. The sound of his landing carries through the room, then fades into the hum of the equipment. He lies still on the cold surface. A long, dim corridor runs from the medical bay toward a diffuse glow at its opposite end, the walls lined with panels whose displays sit quiet. The surface beneath him is cold and smooth, the room behind him still holding the low hum of the equipment that kept him alive. He pushes himself upward in stages, one hand braced against the side of the bunk, the other against the floor. He reaches his feet and stands without moving. His breath is uneven, and his weight shifts as he steadies. He turns toward the light and moves in its direction, his hand brushing the wall for balance. The panels along the passage track him without changing their quiet displays. The glow takes the shape of a narrow viewing window set into the wall ahead. He stops in front of it. Beyond the glass, a field of stars opens in every direction, fixed and cold against the absolute black. There is no horizon, no ground, no reference to fix against. Only the window, the man, and the still expanse on the other side. Turning from the window, he faces back down the passage. The stars remain behind him, their light thrown against the walls in a diffuse wash that fades a few steps in. The electronic voice speaks once more, even in tone, repeating an arithmetic check. An answer forms without thinking, the number arriving before the line ends. His hand moves along the wall, tracing the panels. A narrow hatch is set into the surface, its edge marked by a recessed seam. He stops in front of it. A new prompt follows, asking for the cube root of 8, and after a pause he answers again. A second request arrives, shorter than the others. State your name. His mouth opens. No sound returns. The word is there, behind the question, but it does not surface. He tries once more, and again there is only the pause. The hand on the hatch does not move. The seam holds its position. Behind him, the field of stars stays fixed against the black, and the voice repeats the request into the quiet corridor. The corridor returns him to the medical bay, and the room opens darker than before, the low light from the window no longer reaching this far. His own bunk sits empty behind him, its sheet pulled aside from where he climbed free. On the opposite wall, 2 more bunks come into view, each built the same way as the one he left. Each holds a shape. The forms lie still beneath thin covers, their outlines smaller than they should be, the fabric settled close against what lies underneath. He moves nearer and stops a short distance away. The covers do not shift, the chests beneath them do not rise. He stays at the edge of the beds and does not step closer. The voice holds its even rhythm, repeating the cognition check to a chamber that now contains 3 occupied bunks and only 1 listener. The air carries no sound of breathing but his own. The hum of the equipment settles into the stillness, unchanged. He lowers himself against the nearest wall and stays there. The chamber holds as it is. The hum stays at its level. The voice cycles through its readings, and the figure against the wall does not move. His breathing settles. His eyes cross the room without focus, passing the bunks, the equipment racks, the seam set into the corridor bulkhead. A name forms at the edge of thought. He pushes himself upright and walks back along the passage, one hand brushing the surface beside him. At the closed panel, he stops and places his palm against the seam. Ryland Grace. The name arrives in his own voice, spoken to the panel rather than to himself. The hatch responds. Its seal releases with a measured click, and the door draws inward along a track, opening onto a second room set deeper into the ship. This one is lit. A long table stands bolted to the floor at its center, and equipment lines the walls in orderly banks, each unit fixed against the absence of gravity. He steps into the doorway and stops there. His hand rests on the edge of the open hatch. The shape of the space settles into him without asking to be named. Beyond the lab, the passage narrows and ends at a ladder set flush to the wall. He crosses to it and climbs. The rungs are short and close together, the kind designed for a body that has little weight to carry, and his hands move from each rung to the next without effort. The shaft opens above him into a smaller space, rounded at the top, ringed by screens that curve along the whole upper surface. He pulls himself into the cockpit and steadies his feet in the deck. The pilot's seat sits at the center, angled a few degrees back, harness straps laid open across his cushions. Every panel above him is live, blue and amber, readouts, cycling numbers, graphs, diagrams he does not recognize. The air is cooler here, the hum fainter, the chamber carrying less sound than the room behind him. He lowers himself into the chair. The voice speaks at once. Pilot detected. Then silence, except for the systems doing their work in the background. He watches the readouts move across the screens in front of him, each running its own cycle, none of them looking for a reply. A panel to his left holds a simple map. A long curved line stretches across it, marked at intervals, with a single marker advancing along its path. The point carries a label. Hail Mary. He reads the name without thinking, then reads it over. The word matches the shape of the map, and an inner part of him registers both as his own. His finger touches the screen near the labeled point. The display responds with a brighter outline, and a second readout slides open beneath it. Current velocity 11,872 kilometers per second. He takes in the number. The figure does not change on the next pass or the pass after. He sits back in the chair without lifting his eyes from the screen, one hand resting on the armrest, the other still at the edge of the display. The cockpit holds around him, and the ship moves on at its measure. A new tab sits at the edge of the map, marked Live Feed. His finger finds it and presses once. The screens at the front of the cockpit shift together, their readouts folding aside, and the surface becomes clear the way a window becomes clear when the light behind it changes. The numbers drop out. The graphs follow. What remains is a view through the glass. Stars stretch across the pane from one side to the other, held in the same black as the void outside the medical bay, but arranged into patterns he does not know. And near the middle, not close, not distant, an orange sun burns with a steady glow. Its color is wrong. The one he remembers is white at its core and gold at its rim, not this deeper shade held without flicker at the heart of the feed. He sits with the image for a stretch of minutes. His palm returns to the map panel. He pulls the display outward and the ship's marker draws back with it, smaller then smaller again, until the whole shape of a system opens on the screen. A star at its center, rings of orbit around it, and the single point of the Hail Mary curving inward along its path. A second label appears at the opposite side, Sol, and beside it a marker for Earth. Neither is near. The gap between Sul and the position of the vessel crosses the whole width of the panel, then more than that when he pulls the view wider. Earth holds its own small dot at the edge of its home system, far from where the craft now travels. His eyes return to the live image. The amber body rests in its own dark field unchanged. His hand eases back from the display and settles against the armrest. The ship carries its course through the space between stars. Outside, beyond the glass, the Hail Mary moves across the open field at its given speed. Her shape is narrow and extended, built for the single line she follows. Her tanks catch what glow reaches them and return it in low shadow. The black around her has no horizon. Ahead, the orange sun holds its place, the destination set into her path from some earlier decision. Behind her, there is only the run of the void and the small, distant point she left behind. A narrow storage bay rests at the far end of the corridor, lined with metal shelving and sealed containers held in place by thin fabric straps. The light here is low and even, pressed into the walls rather than cast from any single source. Nothing on the shelves has been touched in a long while. Grace moves through the bay with the careful step of someone still learning the shape of the room. He reaches the end of the shelving and rests his hand against the edge of a recessed panel. Beneath it, 2 folded flight suits lie stacked on a low ledge, their sleeves tucked inward in the same pattern. Thin labels sit at the collars. One reads Yao, the other reads Ilyukina. He reads each of them twice. The names do not open into memory. His hand returns to his side. He looks along the row of containers, the way the corridor beyond the doorway darkens without ending. The ship keeps its low register beneath the floor, a sound too thin to name. The bay holds its shape around him, the shelving steady, the 2 folded suits resting side by side where they have rested long before his hand passed near them. The dormitory opens wider than the corridor behind it, its ceiling lifted into a low arc and its walls set with built-in bunks along both sides. 3 bunks are empty and made, their covers drawn tight. 2 are not. On those 2, a pale sheet covers a shape beneath, the length of a body, the rise of a chest that does not rise, the suggestion of folded arms held close. Grace steps through the doorway and stops near the foot of the first occupied bunk. He sets the 2 flight suits down on an empty mattress on the far wall. His hand rests on the fabric, then returns to his side. He does not move closer to the covered forms. On the wall above the bunks, a panel holds 3 small placards. 2 carry the names from the flight suits. The third is blank. A vent releases a thin breath of air, and the edges of the sheets shift by the width of a thread, then settle. The covered shapes keep their outline. The dormitory holds around Grace the way a room holds around a visitor who has arrived too late to be expected. The corridor between the dormitory and the airlock runs straight for a short stretch, its floor set with recessed guide lights, its walls broken by flush panels. A low hum carries along the length of it, pitched lower here by the closed doors on either side. Grace moves through the passage carrying a body dressed in a flight suit, the name Yao stitched above the chest pocket, the head resting against his shoulder. His steps are short. The sound of his footfall does not travel far. At the airlock, the body is lowered onto the floor inside the inner door, near the wall. Grace returns along the same corridor, and the passage returns him a second time, with the second body dressed in the same manner, the name Ilyukina above its chest pocket. He sets it down beside the first, and the two figures lie side by side in the low interior light. Grace seals the inner door and stands at the control panel. A keypad sits under his hand, the label above it reading Jettison in pale lettering. His thumb enters the sequence. A low chime sounds once. The outer hatch releases its seal, and the chamber empties itself in a single breath. The two figures lift from the floor, drift toward the open frame, and pass through into the dark beyond, where they recede against the star field and grow smaller until the distance takes them. The outer hatch closes. The chamber holds its new emptiness behind the sealed wall undisturbed. The dormitory has settled into its emptier shape. The two occupied bunks are stripped now, their sheets folded and set against the foot of each mattress. The three placards on the wall above the bunks remain in their row, two carrying the names and one blank. The room holds a different kind of hush. The hush of a space after work has been done in it. Grace sits on the edge of a bunk facing the far wall, his shoulders lowered, his hands resting on his knees. The far wall is a single screen that runs from floor to ceiling. On the screen, an open shore plays in slow repetition, an expanse of pale water, a line of wet sand, a long swell rising and falling against a horizon that does not shift. The waves rise and fall, they rise and fall again. Grace watches without moving. A chime carries once from a panel behind him, a small even tone. A second tone follows, then a third. The row of indicator lights along the corridor frame shifts from their resting white toward a pale amber that rises and falls at a steady pulse. Grace turns his head toward the sound. The cockpit opens at the top of a short companionway, its ceiling low and curved, its seat set in the center facing a wide primary view screen. Side consoles line both walls with rows of indicator lights that hold at their resting white. The amber pulse from the corridor is carried forward to this room, its rhythm steady along the edge of the main panel. Grace enters and moves to the seat. He lowers himself into it and draws the restraint across his chest. The view screen is already lit. Beyond it, filling the frame through heavy filtering, a star burns at close range. Not the distant point it was when the ship first carried him, but a broad disk with a visible edge and a surface of shifting plasma beneath the filter. Its light washes the cockpit in a warm tint the ship has not shown him before. His hands find the console. A readout labels the star Tau Ceti. He moves through the view screen options and selects the Petrovascope. The image on the screen shifts. The star dims under the new filter, and from the lower edge of its disk, a dark red arch rises and curves outward, a thin arc of light-absorbing matter drawn against the black. The arch holds its shape. Grace looks at it for a long measure without speaking. The ship carries on in its low register beneath him, and the arch holds its place in the dark frame, unbroken. The arch holds its place on the screen. The amber pulse along the side consoles has steadied into a single even rhythm. no longer rising and falling, now a constant low alert. Grace keeps his hands on the console edge. He moves through the side camera feeds without leaving the petrovascope view on the main frame. On one of the smaller screens, a shape enters the edge of the frame and does not leave. It holds its position a measured distance from the Hail Mary, close enough to read but not close enough to read easily. He lifts the feed onto the main view screen. The petrovascope drops. The filter clears. The second shape fills the frame. It is a ship, 3 times the length of the Hail Mary, its lines angular in a way that matches no interior surface Grace has passed through in this one. Its hull carries no light of its own. The star field behind it holds still, and the shape holds still against it, and the two vessels face one another without motion. Grace's hand rests on a small control wheel set into the console's lower panel. He presses it once. Outside, a single thruster flares along the hull of the Hail Mary and settles. On the other ship, a thruster at a matching position fires once in answer. He presses the control 3 times in sequence. The other ship answers 3 in sequence exact. The cockpit holds around him. The amber pulse even, the 2 ships facing one another across the gap, neither moving further. The ship is no longer facing the alien vessel alone. A small object has lifted from the far hull, crossed the gap between the 2 ships, and now approaches the midsection of the Hail Mary, a cylinder the size of a coffee can, turning end over end against the star field. Grace moves through the corridor in an EVA suit, his boots magnetized to the floor, his breathing held close inside the helmet. He enters the airlock, cycles the outer door, and clips himself to the tether along the hull. The light from Tau Ceti washes across the suit's fabric in a warm filter. The cylinder turns once more toward him. His glove closes around it. Inside the lab, the cylinder floats under 0 gravity. He pulls himself to the touch screen and enters a command. The ship enters a long rotation along its length. The floor finds weight. The cylinder lowers to the table under the new gravity and comes to rest. The cylinder opens at a thin groove along its middle. Inside the lower half, a small sculpture sits in a bed of soft material, 2 metal spheres connected by a curved arc, one larger than the other, the whole shape held upright by thin wire supports. A second cylinder arrives at the airlock, and he returns to retrieve it. The second one holds another model, a pair of ships, one the shape of the Hail Mary, the other the shape of the vessel across the gap, connected by a thin tunnel between them. He places the second model beside the first. The lab holds its new gravity around him, the 2 sculptures resting on the table, the meaning of the second clear in the pattern of its pieces. The tunnel extends from the alien ship in a single straight line. It meets the Hail Mary at the airlock, and the hull shifts once under the contact. Then the motion stops. Mechanical arms along the outer surface move in short measured pulls, fastening the seam at the joint, then retract and leave the passage in place. Inside the airlock, Grace stands in his EVA suit. His breathing is audible inside the helmet. The inner door seals. The chamber cycles. The outer door opens onto a space that holds no illumination of its own. He switches on his helmet lamps. 2 narrow beams cut ahead and find the curved interior of the passage. Grace steps in. His hands find a surface to pull against, and he moves along in the low arc of 0 gravity, the lamp sweeping forward a few meters at each push. The air is pressurized. His arm display shows the reading. He keeps moving. The corridor ahead is unlit, and at the far end, the light meets a wall. It is not metal. The whole surface is built from tiles, and each tile is a hexagon. Most are opaque and hold their own color, a patchwork of shaded tones laid side by side. One near the bottom is translucent. Grace pulls himself low and brings the beams up against it. Inside the pane there is only unbroken black. He taps the translucent tile. Tap, tap, tap. The sound carries through the suit and into the corridor. A shape enters the frame on the far side of the glass. The light catches the edge of it, a curved form with a point, and the form reaches out from within. 3 short contacts match to his own. The translucent pane holds the only break in the hexagon wall. Behind it, the space is deep and unlit, and the helmet lamps do not reach very far into that depth. The claw stays at the window, then withdraws. Grace holds himself in place at the pane. He does not move away. His breath fogs the inside of the helmet and clears again in a steady cycle. A second shape enters the frame. It is smaller than the first. The object rests between 2 curved fingers and pushes up against the translucent tile from within, and the lamps catch the outline. It is the Hail Mary, a small replica built to scale, the same pattern as the models that arrived in the canisters. Then a second figure comes into view alongside the ship. It is a figurine of a person in a suit. The arms and legs extend out from a compact body, and the helmet is a clear sphere. The figurine moves across the glass and slides into the small replica, coming to rest inside the hull. Grace looks over his shoulder. His own airlock is behind him, still open, the warmer interior of the ship visible past the threshold. He pushes himself back along the corridor. The lamps sweep across the curved walls in reverse. At the airlock, he pulls himself through, and the door cycles closed behind him. Inside the Hail Mary, a camera feeds the far end of the passage to one of the cockpit screens. The wall of tiles fills most of the frame, then the wall shifts. The whole surface pulls backward into the dark on the far side, even and unhurried, until it leaves the view. The passage is lit this time. Small lamps have been taped to the walls at measured intervals, and an even illumination now runs from end to end. The hexagon wall at the far end carries a new surface. The whole face is a single clear pane set into the frame, and the space beyond it holds in darkness. Grace pulls himself up to the pane and settles. His arm display reads a high oxygen level for the corridor air. He leaves the EVA suit closed for now. On the far side, a form walks forward into the edge of the light. At first pass, it reads like a large spider. The body is the size of a mid-range dog. 5 jointed legs radiate out from a central carapace, each one bent at an elbow and ending in 3 curved fingers. The whole frame is segmented rock, the color of weathered stone. There is no visible eye and no face. A cloth garment covers the upper carapace, cut with holes for the limbs. The creature lifts one of its front legs and moves it in a short arc. Grace lifts his own arm in return. The exchange settles into a pattern. Each motion finds an answer on the far side of the glass, one mirroring the next through the pressurized air. Then the creature turns toward the ceiling. A small package rests in the seam, 2 spheres held in place. One carries an embossed image of the Hail Mary. The other carries an image of the alien ship. Grace takes down the first sphere. Inside is a long strand of threaded beads, 2 rings of 8 beads joined at a single thread, 2 atoms, 8 protons each, oxygen twice. The arm display still reads high. The corridor is safe. Grace reaches up to the helmet seal and opens it, and the air holds. The lab is the warmest space in the ship. The overhead panels hold a steady white light, and the counters are clear from edge to edge. The beaded chains from the second sphere are laid across the center of the main table in a row. One pattern repeats most often: 7 beads connected to 3 separate atoms of 1 bead each, 7 protons, 3 hydrogens, nitrogen bound 3 times over, ammonia. The same reading explains the faint cleaning fluid odor that comes across with every package. Back in the corridor, Grace holds a small analog clock up to the clear pane. The second hand moves in a steady sweep. The creature watches through the glass and turns its own front legs in a short circle. The first version of the clock does not carry. He studies the flat ink on the dial, then takes the piece back to the lab, pries the face open, and fits raised pieces over each flat numeral. When he returns, the creature engages at once. The raised numerals carry through sonar. Time enters the shared vocabulary. 2 laptops are taped together at the workstation and brought into the corridor. One records sound, the other plays it back. Grace points at the number 1 on the dial and speaks a word. The creature answers in a short cluster of notes. The waveform appears on the screen, and the file stores under the label. He speaks the word for 2. Another answer. Another file. The method carries. Grace pats his own chest and speaks his name. The other side returns a pattern of notes, and the file stores under the label Grace. Then he points across the glass and gives the name in return. Rocky. On the far side of the pane, the carapace bounces in place, harmonizing along with the notes as they come back through the laptop speaker. The name is received. The lab shelves carry a row of sealed containers. One is marked astrophage. Grace removes a small vial from the case. The glass holds a dark, oily substance that absorbs the overhead light without giving any back. In the corridor, he holds the vial up to the clear pane. Rocky's posture shifts at the sight of it. The carapace lowers, the front claws draw in closer to the body, and the usual song drops to a quieter register. Grace enters the word into the translator. Astrophage. The laptop speaks the word across to the far side, and Rocky answers in a short, low phrase. The screen on the ship's interface now mirrors the laptop, and the translated text passes across the display. Astrophage on me star. Bad, bad, bad. Grace reads the line twice. The same reason brought both ships here. Rocky asks about the name of Grace's star. Sol. Grace offers the word for the other. Eridani. 2 more entries in the database. Then the next line arrives across the screen. Grace Rocky help stars. The answer returns on the other side of the glass. Yes. Work together. Help stars. On the far side of the pane, Rocky bounces once in place. The translator catches the next phrase. Rocky happy, then another. Rocky happy, not alone. Grace holds in place at the wall. The last word rests on the screen. He types a new question. Where is the rest of the crew? The answer comes in short pieces. Was 23 Iridians on ship. Now only 1. Grace takes the next breath in the pressurized air of the tunnel. His own reply forms on the screen. 3 of us. 2 died on the way. Now there is only me. Rocky lowers his carapace against the deck on the far side. Neither figure moves. The corridor holds its even light, and the low hum of the ship's systems carries through the hull under a quiet that belongs to both of them. A green world fills the frame. Dark and light bands cross his face, the turbulent suggestion of a gas giant pressed into a smaller sphere. The atmosphere holds no continents, no seas, only moving color, ribboned across the surface and curling into itself along the terminator. A thin seam of illumination rests against its edge. The Hail Mary cuts into the frame from the upper arc of orbit. The ship approaches on a long curve, its hull marked against the green of the planet below. The outer plates still carry the scoring of travel, and the ribs of the spin drive hold their fixed pattern along the underside. Grace stands on the outer hull. The EVA suit holds him low against the plating, the tether anchored behind him, the line trailing back toward the airlock hatch. Below his boots, the green surface of Adrian turns in a measured arc, pale light washing up across the ship and across the suit. He moves along a handrail toward a square cube mounted to the hull, the sampler. Each step lands with the weight of the suit and the friction of the magnetic boots. The tether pays out behind him in clean increments. He reaches the unit, clips in, and pulls the release lever. The sampler detaches. It floats up beside him, a small weighted box tethered to his belt, turning in the vacuum as he begins the walk back toward the airlock. The green planet holds its position below them both, unchanged. The lab holds the steady overhead illumination of the ship's interior. The sampler rests at the center of the table, open now, 2 panels inside it coated in a tacky substance. Above Grace, Rocky has climbed into the viewing position at the ceiling tube, one claw braced against the xenonite. Grace scrapes the coating from the panels. He divides the material into small containers, labels them, and begins the pattern of science work. Slide, microscope, record, next slide. Rocky tracks each step from above. Grace places a smear from the returning sampler under the microscope. He finds focus. The dark dots of astrophage sit across the field in their familiar distribution, but among them other shapes share the frame. Translucent cells, bacterial forms, amoeba-like bodies with slow internal currents. The field is not empty between the astrophage. It is crowded. Grace holds on the screen. Rocky shifts at the ceiling, his carapace rising in a posture Grace has not seen before. Between them, a realization settles without words. The returning astrophage came back reduced because a second form of life in the Adrian atmosphere feeds on it. The pale green planet below the ship is not a world that astrophage infected. It is the one that produced it, and the one that still holds the organism that balances its numbers. Rocky lowers his carapace. The lab returns to its even overhead light. The lab table now holds a model. Rocky has built it from his own xenonite, a small ship shape above, a chain of linked segments dropping from its belly, a rough sphere at the end of the line. The shape hangs across the table like fishing gear cast from a boat, the planet replaced by empty space beneath. Grace stands on the floor side of the tube. He turns the idea over. The problem is set plainly. The sampler must reach the breeding altitude of astrophage in the Adrian atmosphere, which sits at 91 kilometers from the surface. The ship cannot approach within that distance. At that depth, friction alone would burn the hull open. Rocky taps the model with one claw. The chain sways. He explains the thrust angle, how the engines must fire against the direction of travel, how velocity must hold exactly, how too slow means a fall and too fast means escape. The margin is narrow. The list of failure modes is long. Grace listens. The length of xenonite unspools in his mind. 10 kilometers of chain unwound into the air of another world, with the ship held above on its own engines. The retrieval step belongs to him, outside the hull, in a suit under thrust. He nods once. Rocky sets the model upright on the table. They look at it in the ship's overhead light. The cockpit sits in its usual configuration. Grace in the pilot chair, Rocky in his module across the xenonite wall, the screens along the dash holding steady readouts. Below the forward viewport, Adrian turns in its slow arc of green and pale green bands. Grace initiates the roll. The hull rotates in vacuum until its engines face the direction of travel. The horizon outside the viewport tilts and settles in its new orientation. Grace fires the drive against motion. The force presses him backward into the chair. Rocky braces against his walls. Readouts climb across the dash. The ship flies backward now, angled down toward the planet. On the external cameras, the air beneath the engines shifts color. The infrared from the drive pours into the upper atmosphere of Adrian and heats the gas there until it burns red. A band of that color opens under the hull. The band widens, brightens, follows the path across the sky. Rocky reports the temperature readings. The outer plating absorbs the returning heat into its astrophage layer. The numbers hold within margin. The angle against the planet reaches 60 degrees and settles. Grace calls the release. Rocky presses the drop. Outside, the sampler detaches from its housing and falls, a weighted sphere at the head of a chain that unspools in segments from the belly of the ship. Spool by spool, the xenonite pays out into the glowing air. The final spool releases. 10 kilometers of chain hangs between the vessel and the breeding altitude, the sampler at its end. Grace cycles the airlock. The outer door opens onto the plating, and beyond it, the red glow of the cooked air curls around the edges of the ship in long burning ribbons. The hull itself blocks the heat. Grace clips his tether and steps onto the deck. Each stride lands with more weight than the last. The magnetic boots grip. The suit compresses at the knees. Grace reaches the chain's anchor plate at the edge of the hull and kneels. The winch fits between the plate and the first link. Grace confirms the seat and presses the activation. The winch turns. A gear catches a chain link, pulls it in, rotates it, ejects the bent form into the air behind the ship. The next link follows. Links fly into the void in a small blizzard as the xenonite draws up from the atmosphere below. The sampler rises toward the ship. The signal strengthens on the wrist display. The sampler crests the edge of the frame. Grace slows the winch, catches the sphere, clips it to his belt. He takes the first step back toward the airlock under the pull of angled thrust, the chain dragging behind him. The ship shifts beneath his boots. The deck moves once on one axis, then again. The horizon across the viewport tilts upward. Grace catches the handrail. The sampler swings. Inside the cockpit, the screens flash new alerts across the dash. Grace pulls himself into the airlock. The outer door seals behind him. He crosses into the corridor and climbs the ladder to the cockpit under the growing drag of thrust. Rocky holds his position in the module, claws braced against the frame. Grace drops into the pilot chair and cuts the drive. The engines come down, the forward motion stops. For a held beat, the cockpit rests in the silence of zero thrust. The silence does not hold. Weight returns to the cabin. Grace's hand, raised from the armrest, drifts down and to the left. The engines are offline. There should be no pull. Rocky drops a small tool from his belt. It falls at an accelerating rate. The numbers climb on the dash. One screen resolves the source, a hull breach. The port fuel tanks have split, and the astrophage inside them is venting toward the planet in a ragged white plume, a chaotic drive where no drive should be. The force mounts. Grace's chest compresses against the restraints. Breath comes short. He reaches for the jettison control. His arm moves in inches, each forward press a negotiation with the force pinning him back. He strikes the button. The first tank releases. The cabin lurches, and the force crushes him into the chair. Rocky is thrown across the module, bracing with all 5 limbs. Grace fights his hand toward the second control. The metal of the seat groans under the load. He strikes again, and the second tank releases behind them. The cabin falls quiet. A thin, pale vapor rises at the edge of the xenonite wall. Rocky has crossed the barrier. He stands on Grace's side of the cockpit now in the earth atmosphere that corrodes him. Faint smoke curling upward from the seams of his carapace. He reaches down and lifts Grace from the ruined seat. The corridor passes in fragments. Rocky sets Grace into the med bay bunk and presses the autodock panel. Mechanical arms descend from the ceiling one after another, and a needle enters Grace's arm. A tube lowers toward his throat. The edges of his vision narrow. The last image is Rocky lowering to the floor beside the bunk, carapace folded close, the pale vapor still rising from its seams. The lights in the bay dim to their standby level. The ship holds in place. The planet below turns its slow arc of green and paler green bands, unchanged by what has happened above the clouds. The cabin rests in the steady overhead light of the med bay, 2 figures at rest within it. The hum of the autodock cycles in even intervals. Elsewhere along the hull, a single alert blinks on the cockpit dash, with no one present to read the screen. The microscope field shows a single cell at its center. The dark shape of a tau moeba sits in a thin film of liquid. Around it, the medium carries a nitrogen concentration that should have killed the organism on contact. The cell does not die. It keeps its place, drifts a short arc across the frame, and turns against the edge of the slide. Grace sits at the microscope with both hands resting on the table. Rocky watches from above, one claw curled around the ceiling tube. Between them rests a row of xenonite breeder tanks, the latest batch marked in pale ink, 82.5. Grace lifts his head from the eyepiece. He writes a number on the side of the nearest tank. Rocky taps once against the xenonite above. The sound is small and clean. The dormitory holds a softer illumination. The view screen on the far wall carries an image of waves along a pale shoreline. Rocky stands in a patterned cloth suit, the fabric cut into rigid plates that catch the overhead glow. On the table rests a small laptop, its case closed. Beside it, a pouch of clear liquid, labeled in hand-marked letters. Grace lifts the pouch. Rocky raises one claw in the gesture they have shared before. The screen behind them runs its slow wave pattern, the shoreline unchanged across the frame. Grace drinks. The pouch collapses a fraction in his hand. Rocky sets the laptop against his chest plate and braces it there, his posture high against the room. An office holds its place in the mind of the ship. Grace has not seen it in years, but the shape returns the way a room returns in dreams. The wide desk, the stack of folders, the window on the hanger below. Figures in dark uniforms stand at either side of the doorway. Behind the desk sits a woman whose face he has carried with him across the black of space. Grace sits across from her. The chair holds him too upright. He speaks the sentence he has rehearsed, that his place is in the classroom, that he cannot accept the seat on the ship, that he is a teacher and will remain one. The woman says nothing. She watches him the way a chess player watches a board. When she answers, the word lands plainly: coward. She says the climate numbers, the population numbers, the decades it will take to change any of them. She says that if he cared about the children, he would already be on the ship. Grace gathers his reply. He repeats that his mind is made up. The woman lifts her phone to her ear. She tells the figures at the doorway to take him to medical. The room shifts around him. Hands find his arms. A door passes, a corridor passes, a steel frame of a medical ward passes in its even fluorescent glow. Voices speak above him without shape. A needle enters the soft part of his arm. The dormitory returns. Grace lies on the bunk. The view screen still carries the pale shoreline. He turns his face toward the wall. The tunnel hangs between the two ships. The ribbed walls run along its length, the xenonite barrier sealed at its midpoint, the air on either side held at different pressures and different temperatures. Grace moves through the corridor from the Hail Mary, his hand tracing the rail, and comes to rest at the clear wall where he and Rocky first held each other in view. Rocky stands on the far side. He is still wearing the patterned suit from the dormitory, the rigid plates catching the pale interior light of his ship. A small object rests against his claw, a shaped piece of xenonite, rounded and smooth, the rough outline of a human figure. He holds it out against the wall. Grace sets his hand against the barrier. The xenonite is warm on Rocky's side and cool on his own. They do not speak. When they do, the words are short, already practiced. Take care of the laptop. Stay in the inner chamber against the radiation. The journey will be longer for one than for the other. Grace lifts his hand from the wall. Rocky lifts a claw in the small wave they learned together. Grace returns the gesture. The outer view shifts. The two ships sit against the star field, the tunnel drawn back into the hull of each, a gap of vacuum opening between them. The Hail Mary turns onto its outbound vector, the long line of its spin drive tilting toward Earth. Rocky's ship turns opposite. They part along two separate curves, their engines pale against the black, until the distance grows too wide to follow in a single frame. The cockpit carries an alarm that rolls in slow, even cycles through the cabin, a low rising tone that sits under the skin of the ship. Grace pulls himself from the dormitory bunk with a beard now and longer hair, the cabin around him worn by months of living. He reaches the console. The screen carries the line "Foreign Presence Detected," and under it the location, Laboratory. Grace flicks the camera feed to the lab. The Xenonite breeder tanks sit where he left them. The outline of one is wrong, a film of black material traced along its inner wall, like a shadow drawn across the Xenonite from within. Grace works without sound. He shuts down the engines and the heat, pulls an EVA suit over his body, and opens the outer valve. The air of the ship hisses out into the vacuum of space. The Talmweba cannot survive what he has done to the cabin. Later, the lab holds him at its center, a sealed container in his gloved hand, the Xenonite tank set before him. The film is eaten through at a level the eye cannot see. No crack, no open seam, only the material itself giving way from within. Grace holds still for a long count of breath, sets down the container, and turns toward the viewport. Rocky's ship moves through the black behind them, its engines failing, its fuel already consumed from within by the thing Grace made. Grace returns to the desk. He opens a notebook and works the math. Fuel, distance, food, years. The numbers close in. His pen rests on the page. The decision is not spoken aloud. He closes the notebook and walks toward the cockpit. 4 small probes hang along a rack in the bay of the ship, each the size of a suitcase. Grace moves between them with a memory card in his gloved hand. He fits it into the last of the 4 and closes the hatch against a handwritten label, Strat, pressed flat against the plating. The bay door opens onto space. The 4 probes release in even intervals, their engines turning toward Earth, and drift below the lower frame of the ship. The dormitory view screen carries the pale shoreline one more time. Grace stands in the dim cabin, his hand against the side of the screen. The image fades under his fingers. The wall returns to its standby black. Rocky's ship fills the viewport of the airlock. It is unlit along the hull, the familiar ridges against the star field. Grace stands in the open hatch in the EVA suit, the tether fixed behind him at the ring of the ship. He leans forward and pushes off. The vacuum opens around him. His gloved hand catches the antenna on the far hull, and the impact runs up his arm. He pulls himself along the plating to the tunnel alcove Rocky built between them. He tethers in. The translucent Xenonite is unlit on the other side. Grace lifts the wrench from his belt and strikes the hull in a slow rhythm. He pauses, then strikes again. A movement shifts inside the dim space. A shape comes forward against the Xenonite, carapace marked and seamed, one claw lifted in the smallest wave. 16 years later, a new world fills the frame, its atmosphere marked in bands of amber and deep rust, the surface hidden beneath a moving layer of cloud. A habitat of clear material sits on the plain below, small against the curve of the planet. The bedroom under the dome. Grace wakes in a low bed as the shutters open, and the light of morning on Earth enters the room. He is older now. His hair has turned. A cane rests against the wall beside the bed. Later, he crosses a garden of shaped stones at the middle of the habitat, the cane carrying part of his weight. Overhead, the lamps hold their imitation of a sun. A knocking sounds at the airlock at the edge of the enclosure. Grace opens the seal. Rocky steps through in a sleeker containment suit, his carapace moving freely in the earth air. They walk the grounds, two old friends under a sky that is not a sky. Rocky speaks first. The astronomy hive reports that the home sun has returned to full luminance. Grace stops. He lowers himself onto a stone bench, lifts his face toward the lamp overhead, and his mouth moves around words that do not reach the microphone. Another chamber. Rows of small enclosures partition the room, each holding a young Iridian, claws resting against the clear wall of its seat. Grace stands at the front in his own compartment, a marker in his hand, a board of chalk lines behind him. He asks a question about the speed of light. Small claws rise across the room. Grace lifts one of his own in return, and the lamps above hold their steady approximation of a sun.